Let's talk about this idea that Brian Kohberger is being framed. Now, I've made no secret of the fact I think he's guilty, and I think the evidence supports that. I don't think he's been framed. I don't think he's been set up. I don't think he's a patsy. I think he did it. And I think he did it because I believe that a man is capable of the kind of rage it would take to unalive four people with a knife and potentially beat one of them so badly she was left unrecognizable. And I think he could have done it in 9 minutes, mainly because of the weapon that he used, and because, which is something a lot of people seem to be forgetting, these kids were all wasted. We saw the grub truck video, right? We saw the way they were kind of tripping over themselves a little bit. We saw it. At the very least, we knew that they were drunk. And as someone who used to get drunk in college and used to trip over themselves in college, I know what that looks like. And I also know that if somebody had come into my room late at night on one of those nights where I had maybe drank too much, if I was awake at all and not completely passed out, I wouldn't have been able to defend myself because all my reactions, like every impulse, everything would have been slowed. Any way I could have defended myself in a situation like that, if I were drunk, all of those ways would have been impaired because of the alcohol. Now, rage, on the other hand, rage can invigorate somebody and fill them with the kind of strength and energy it would take to unalive four people. I think Brian Kohberger went into that bedroom with the intention of either SAing Maddie or unaliving Maddie. And when he saw Kaylee there, I think he either assumed that they were lovers or saw that his plan was thwarted because she was fighting back. And I think that is when he just flew into a rage and is why he unalives the other two roommates. I don't think Ethan and Xana were collateral damage. I think once he started attacking Kaylee and the rage and the testosterone was spiking, I think he was just in a frenzy. And I think that's why he went after Ethan and Xana. But I want to hear why you think law enforcement would choose this random guy. Why would they choose this random guy to pin this horrific crime on? And how would they have done it? And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, the touch DNA. You need a certain amount of skin cells in order to build a profile from touch DNA. What would make you think that the police would know exactly how many skin cells to use to plant that DNA on the sheath? They wouldn't. Not to mention, they would have had to plant it on scene. You know why? Because DNA degrades very quickly. Maybe not in a couple of hours, but you would have to keep those skin cells somewhere where they wouldn't degrade in any way. You think they were just carrying these skin cells on them? And if we're going to talk about DNA, let's talk about the other three unidentified DNA they found in the house. And a lot of people are saying, well, that was a house where there was constant parties. There had to have been more DNA. Of course, there probably was. But that doesn't mean that whatever DNA was in there was usable, because DNA degrades, especially in an environment like that where there's all kinds of, there's alcohol and there's people in and out and there's dirt and there's probably smoking and vaping and maybe some marijuana. That DNA is going to degrade very quickly, as in within a couple of weeks. It could be as early as that. Could take longer, but it could be as soon as a couple of weeks. Or the DNA is commingled, meaning because there's so many people in there, people's DNA is getting mixed up and they can't use it. And the reason why they know that it was three male DNA is because identifying somebody's sex is the easiest thing to identify using DNA, because all they have to look for is the presence of a Y chromosome. Another reason why people think that this is a frame job is because they think there was cleanup, because people think that there was only one person's DNA on that sheath. No, All they say in the PCA is that it was single source mail, because the whole PCA is about identifying Brian Kohberger as the suspect to get a warrant. That doesn't mean that there wasn't other blood on the sheath. They're just not mentioning it. It's a given. As for the latent shoe print, people say, well, if it was latent, it must have been cleaned. No, not necessarily. If he was just wearing shoes and he walked and they were new shoes, especially, and he put them on, say, right before he went into the house, he carried them with him, well, no, there probably wouldn't be anything on the soles to leave any kind of mark. And that doesn't mean that there's only one footprint in the house. It just means, again, they identified a footprint that was just in front of Dylan's bedroom. And I am going to say again, this is even more confirmation for me that Dylan and the suspect had some kind of run-in right in that area, in the foyer, in the hallway. And that's why they were able to find a shoe print. Something made him stop long enough that he was able to leave a footprint. Now, if you listen to the King Road Killings podcast, they say that their sources close to the investigation have confirmed that the crime scenes were all contained to the bedrooms, meaning that there was very little sign of the unalivings anywhere except the bedrooms. It makes no sense to me that people would think that one person couldn't be capable of leaving a crime scene that clean, but two people could. Double the traffic. It's more likely that two people left a clean crime scene versus one. And sure, could Jack Showalter or Jack DeCore be suspects? Of course. But if they wanted to unalive one of those four, don't you think they would have just lured them somewhere secluded? Maybe done it somewhere where there wouldn't be a risk of running into the other roommates? Why would they risk going into a situation where there's a high probability they're going to get caught? And I'm sure someone's going to say, well, you think Brian Kohberger did it. Well, I think whoever unalived these people, they're not rational. So I can't apply rational thinking to someone who would commit such an irrational act. And if anyone cares about my explanation for that, I think that he was overwhelmed with an impulse to go in. I think he couldn't fight it. I think it's very similar to his history, or I think it's associated with his history of addiction. I think that urge for that feeling of pleasure, or for that feeling of something, anything, because didn't he say he always felt very like numb and detached? I think he just couldn't fight the urge that he had. And that's why he escalated to unaliving somebody. But you think that they didn't immediately track the Elantra that left the scene at 4:20 and didn't just leave the scene, left the scene so fast that it left skid marks and you could hear the screech of tires and drawing attention to themselves. Something spooked him. And you think that when they were tracking that car, they didn't notice that the front license plate was missing? You don't think that when WSU looked at the footage of him driving in and out of the campus around the time of the murders, what, like 2:45 to 5:30? You don't think they noticed that he had a missing front license plate? Just because they didn't say in the news that they were looking for somebody who drove an Elantra that was missing a front license plate doesn't mean that they were. Again, this is an investigation, and they're going to have to play certain things close to their vest to make sure that the suspect doesn't run. Because it was just a coincidence that he was out driving around the time of the murders, and that his phone was off around the time of the unalivings. And for anybody who says, well, what if the battery died? Well, he was able to turn it back on before he reached home, which means he had a charger if, in fact, the battery had run out. And I guess it's just weird that he was in that area 12 different times before the unalivings, and yet after the unalivings, never went back there again. So he just happened to be driving the car that they were looking for, and he just happened to be leaving and returning to the WSU campus around the time of the murders, and his phone just happened to be off around the time of the murders. Oh, and his DNA just happened to be found on the sheath of the weapon believed to have been used in the crime. Explain to me, is he just the unluckiest person alive, or did he do it? And can we please stop using the story about him asking if anybody else had been arrested when he was arrested? This was not true. It was never confirmed. This was something that came from Brian Enton. He was never able to confirm it. And Kohberger's lawyer said that when he was arrested, he did not say, "Have you arrested anybody else?" And Dylan's eyewitness testimony. So the physical description of who she thought she saw and Brian Kohberger, it just so happens that it's similar, especially the eyebrows, which totally look bushy depending on whether or not there's shadows on his face. And if what the lighting was low in that house at the time that they ran into each other, it would probably, a shadow would be on his face. See, I don't find it hard to believe that a man could hate women as much as someone would need to in order to unalive three of them and one of their boyfriends. I understand what rage can do to a person. And when you think about the timeline and the kind of rage that this crime shows, because not only we have the 4 unalivings, but now apparently, which it might be very likely that one of the victims was also beaten. Why? Why would they beat that victim to the point where they were unrecognizable? Now, maybe could it have been that they were fighting back? Maybe, sure. But somebody who's going in there, but that crime, it was personal. It was personal to the whoever was committing it. They may not have had a personal connection to anybody there, but it was personal to them. That's why law enforcement originally said that this was a targeted attack, because of the brutality of the crime scene. If the police wanted to frame somebody, why not frame one of the roommates? Why not frame Dylan? Why not frame one of the frat guys? They're, within feet of the house. There probably was some stories of maybe Ethan not getting along with somebody. Maybe there was even stories of Dylan not getting along with Xana, because I don't remember seeing any or many pictures of Dylan and Xana together. Why wouldn't they just frame Dylan? And keep in mind, Dylan may very well could have heard what she thought was Ethan and Xana fighting in her bedroom. It's totally possible that Dylan just didn't like Xana and was like, I'm not dealing with that. She's allowed to do that. That doesn't implicate her in a murder. She's not required or obligated to go put herself in a dangerous situation, especially for someone she maybe didn't like. Just because they all lived together doesn't mean that they were friends. So you've got the car, you've got the sheath and the DNA on the sheath. You've got him returning and leaving the WSU campus around the time of the murders. You have his phone being turned off around the time of the murders. You have him not returning to a place where he frequented before the murders. Tell me why. I want to hear in the comments why you think he's being framed. I want to hear with evidence, with facts, why you think more than one person was involved. Tell me. And you don't have to convince me. It's not your job. I'm not telling you to do that. But I really want to understand this, because so far I just cannot understand why anybody would think that Brian Kohberger is being set up or framed. So tell me what you think in the comments.